Hey everyone, it's been a while since I made a true Age of Empires video, and I thought I wasn't gonna make any more, but here we are! The Chinese are a rather broad, open civilization with a very interesting archer unique unit. They're not the strongest civilization in deathmatch or in the late game. However, their very unique and interesting bonuses set them apart from all of the other civilizations and really changes the way you play with them and you use them when compared to standard deathmatch civs. Welcome back. I'm JRED and this is my overview of the Chinese civilization for deathmatch. To start off, their most unique and their most powerful bonus is that they start with 3 extra villagers, and their town center has 5 more population space. As you can imagine, for a deathmatch game in which the objective early is to get as many buildings and military units out as possible, having extra villagers will give the Chinese a significant boost. However, the fact that their town center has 5 extra population means they don't get housed immediately, making this bonus even better than you might think it is. Having twice as many starting villagers as your standard civilization means they'll be able to create their military buildings far quicker and create far more of them in the same amount of time when compared to a generic civilization. I originally wanted to do some tests to see how fast they are when compared to a generic civilization or a fast one such as the Huns or the Goths. However, there's an issue that I think would make a mathematical comparison impossible and, to be honest, not very accurate. This is that with all of these extra villagers, you do start strong as the Chinese, but they're very difficult to manage. At the start of a deathmatch game, your very first goal is to place the foundations for 6 buildings before your 4th villager is created. This would be 2 building foundations per villager. By the same logic, using 2 buildings per villager, you would need to build 12 of them before the 4th villager comes out, which is extremely difficult to do, and by the time you place that 12th building, you're going to have significant idle time. Instead, you need to think about this strategically. I would suggest that you put all of your villagers on the very first building, and then you take them off one by one as you're creating your other foundations. You do this to make sure that no villager is idle while you're placing your first 6 foundations. You may want multiple villagers per stable in order to get early units out first as well, because while the Chinese do have all of these extra villagers and a strong start, they don't have treadmill crane, so their first units will come out slower than another civilization's unless you double up. I know it's not really efficient, but if you are trying to rush, it'll still work, and it'll be fine because you have all of these extra villagers. And finally, when it comes to your base layout, speed is more important than accuracy is for once. While speed is normally important in most civilizations, it's usually a good idea to go a little bit slower to place the foundations perfectly with exactly 1 tile gaps between them to be efficient. With the Chinese, however, you need to use your high villager quantity to your advantage, and this means it's okay if your base layout is a bit sloppy, just so long as you're using your villagers relatively efficiently. This covers the specific Chinese opening techniques, but I'll talk about their build order later in the video. Moving on, the second half of this bonus is that they actually lose resources. This is because the game is balanced for random map, and the idea is that you have more villagers, but you have less resources, so you need to use those villagers effectively. However, for deathmatch, the amount of resources you lose is insignificant, so it's not applicable. The same thing is true for their other significant bonus, actually, which is that technologies cost less the more you age up. Again, this isn't applicable for deathmatch because all your technologies are researched anyway. Moving on, the next bonus is that demolition ships have plus 50% HP. This means that for heavy demos, you have 150 HP instead of 70. Because they survive 9 shots instead of 6 shots versus galleons, or 50% more, they're less likely to die before they hit their targets. While it's not a super strong navy bonus for deathmatch, it's still pretty solid. The Chinese unique unit is the Chu Ko Nu. Now, I've already talked about this in another video, and that video was actually pretty interesting. I suggest you watch it, but basically, in brief, the Chu Ko Nu is basically an arbalest with higher attack, health, and more arrows. Being able to shoot multiple arrows makes them deal a tremendous amount of damage, and as such, they're a great support unit. In Deathmatch, they're a better choice than arbalests. You might have watched my arbalest video, in which I did a test that proves that you can get arbs out faster than elite archer units, such as the Chu Ko Nu. However, I failed to mention that in the specific case of the Chu Ko Nu, you just make castles anyway because of all the extra villagers the Chinese have. With a normal civilization, making castles early as your first building in Deathmatch can really slow you down, even fatally. However, with the extra villagers, the Chinese are fast enough to have castles be among their first group of buildings, and their Chu Ko Nu are strong enough to make it worth it. Their main drawback when compared to the arbalest is that they have one less range, making them theoretically slightly easier to hit with onagers or scorpions. However, if you're paying attention and micro the Chu Ko Nu, they'll kill the siege much faster because of all their extra arrows. You should still definitely avoid siege. Onagers are a huge counter to Chu Ko Nu, but in a pinch you can still save them if you need to. Their unique technology that was added in the HD expansions is the Great Wall tech. This makes walls and towers have 30% more HP. It can definitely be nice to stall, and it's really good to keep bombard towers alive longer, but it's not a super strong bonus because it doesn't affect castles, and several trebs or siege rams will deal with your bombard towers easily enough despite the extra HP. The Chinese' other unique technology is Rocketry, which gives Chu Ko Nu +2 attack and Scorpions +4. This is part of the reason elite Chu Ko Nu are so powerful. For Scorpions, it gives them 21 attack instead of 17, but the Chinese miss siege engineers and therefore that technology's range buff, meaning their Scorpions have to get closer than most other civilizations. They're still really strong, but you have to be very careful with them because they're more vulnerable to onagers. And finally, their team bonus is that farms have +45 food capacity. This is actually more of a wood bonus because it doesn't mean that they change the speed at which they gather the food, but instead it means that you need to have less wood to create farms because you're going to be reseeding your farms less frequently. After spending the last 4 months learning the secrets of the Chinese farms, I made an incredible discovery that's sure to serve as the most important breakthrough in modern military strategy and socio-economic theory since the discovery of the high ground. Wood is super plentiful in Deathmatch. And Chinese lose anyway because they don't have crop rotation.
Mission failed. We'll get them next time.
Overall, most of the Chinese bonuses are useful, but they're not overwhelming with the exception of their extra villager start, which is extremely strong. And as such, let's move on and talk about the Chinese tech tree. The Chinese archers are top tier for Deathmatch, and I would even say they're the best in the game, because their Chu Ko Nu have an extremely high damage output and work decently well versus units that traditionally counter archers, such as Eagle Warriors, Cavalry, and Rams. Combine this with the fact that they have a strong opening, you can actually get a sizable amount of these units out faster than any other archer civilization. This vastly increases their utility and overall strength. They don't have hand cannoneer or Parthian tactics, but they don't need those to make their archers dangerous. However, as with any other predominantly archer civilization, remember that top-tier cavalry or siege will still have far stronger overall power. Their infantry is average because they miss nothing, but they have no bonuses, just like most civilizations. Their cavalry is above average because they only miss paladin and they have a strong rush with the extra villagers. They're not top tier, but they are better than many. Their siege is average. This grade might be somewhat surprising because they have the incredibly important siege ram and the dangerous heavy scorpions. However, they critically miss siege engineers, making both their onagers and heavy scorpions range less than stellar. Don't get me wrong, they should definitely use their siege rams and scorpions for support, but not as a backbone to their army. This grade's almost above average, but when compared to the utility that siege engineers give all siege, I can't justify a higher grade. Their defenses are above average because they have bombard towers, camels, and as always that super strong start, but without a significant defensive bonus or siege engineers, I can't give them the top tier grade. Unlike a true defensive infrastructure civilization, the Chinese will struggle versus an opponent with a strong deathmatch army of some combination of siege, elephants, and cavalry. Overall, the Chinese have a very open tech tree that allows them to do lots of very different things, and so let's talk about their strategy to see when they should use certain units. Now, as you can tell, their opening bonus is pretty strong. However, they don't have treadmill cranes, so they're not a top-tier rush civilization. For the Chinese, it's hard to recommend an exact by-the-numbers opening build order because of their unique villager bonus and their open tech tree. However, in general, start off by putting all your villagers on your first building, and then take them off one by one for an efficient opening where your villagers are always working. If you specifically want to rush, make these buildings stables for camels and early villager snipes. This is actually very common in Oasis games. If you don't want to rush, instead make some combination of castles, workshops, and a third military building to complement your Chu Ko Nu and Siege. Also note, in a 1 vs 1, unless your opponent makes lots of cavalry, halbs are probably better than camels for the entirety of the game because of the gold savings. Also, versus the Goths, you might want to invest heavily in some combination of Cavaliers, Champions, and Scorpions, as your Chu Ko Nu won't be very effective versus Huskarls. A unique and somewhat risky opening is to put your first 6 villagers on your first castle without taking them off until that castle is completed. This allows that castle to be finished by the time the enemy scout comes, making you impervious to raids. You can also do this with your first stable to create that first camel or cavalier extremely quickly for villager snipes. However, your total villager efficiency will be less than stellar and you may fall behind. In general, as the game goes on, it's very important to keep your Chu Ko Nu alive, as they're a unit you don't want to really spend resources on replacing. Instead, you want to be spending these resources, especially gold, on siege, infantry, or cavalry as needed. With the exception of massed heavy cavalry or Huskarls, Chu Ko Nu will absolutely obliterate any charging units, especially if your Chu Ko Nu outnumber your opponents, and as a result, they're very effective at protecting your siege. Just make sure you keep them safe, as they're very susceptible to onagers. For your economy, create several town centers on gold and wood. Unless you're making a lot of infantry or cavalry, you won't need very much food for a little while anyway, but this will change from game to game, so just keep an eye on this. As with any civilization, when fighting against the Chinese, try to get villager kills early to slow them down, but don't rely solely on that. The Chinese' main advantage in deathmatch is that they can survive early pressure especially well, but they're simply outclassed by true power civilizations. Onagers can deal with Chinese foot units pretty effectively, and elephants or cavalry will force their archers to try to retreat, yielding you some form of map control if you play your cards right. However, to push the Chinese, you'll definitely need ranged siege, as their Chu Ko Nu can shred rams and their bombard towers can be tough to take down. If you are able to take out their masses of Chu Ko Nus and follow this up with a sustained push, however, the Chinese probably won't have many real options. Overall, the Chinese are a strangely unique civilization in that they're difficult to use well, but they're not obviously weak either. They'll never be my first choice in deathmatch, but I can see why many people like them. As always, thanks for watching this video. I kind of feel like this video doesn't really cover the civilization fully, but again, I've talked about Arbalests, Chu Ko Nus, Scorpions, and to be honest, deathmatch strategy itself in many other videos that went more in depth that are definitely recommended if you want to learn more. As always, thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.